All right. We are coming at you pre-recorded in glorious 720p on my phone that doesn't have service anymore, but it has a better camera than my current phone. And hopefully we'll get more than just this, Anyway, I just thought I would walk in the woods and hold a camera and talk to it. So here goes. I've already attempted this once and was only marginally successful, so we're going to try it again. And I guess you could call this a video testimony. I was encouraged by a friend online who thought the idea of me talking about my faith and stuff like that on the internet would be cool, walking around in the woods. I guess that's kind of going to be my video format. So here goes. And I wanted to tell the story of how I became an Orthodox Christian, and it's probably going to get just a tiny bit long-winded, but hopefully not too bad. Anyway, without further ado, because limited disk space, here we go. A little while ago, somebody posted anonymously on the internet that they are not a Christian and haven't been a religious person at all, and I guess want some kind of encouragement and feel drawn towards spirituality. And so I'm going to try to kind of paraphrase or partially read what this anonymous poster said. And then my absolute stack of encyclopedias that I dropped on their lap as a response. Hopefully I didn't overwhelm that person. Hopefully they'll show up at my church asking questions. I'm posting anonymously because I'd really appreciate some advice and guidance on where to go from here. I didn't grow up religious. My parents didn't emphasize any specific faith. We just celebrated holidays in a general cultural way. Religion wasn't a focus in our home. I'm very anxious and grew up in a narcissistic household, which has had a big impact. Now, as a parent myself, I find that I am easily triggered and overwhelmed. Lately, I've been feeling a pull towards something deeper, something that could help me feel grounded. I've seen friends and family find peace through faith, scripture, and prayer. And I'm looking at something flying around. Let me see here. Scripture and prayer. And it has made me wonder if turning to God will help me too. The thing is, I recently tried going to church, and it felt very uncomfortable. As someone who's not a Christian or aligned with any religion, it was hard for me to connect or understand the experience. I'm really just trying to find myself and explore what faith could look like in my life. And I'm just going to cut it off right there. Basically asking for guidance and encouragement. Well, I'm just going to say this before I even get started with my stack of encyclopedias here. If you went to one of those contemporary churches, and making quotes over here, churches, I think that's a pretty generous use of the word church, then no wonder you felt uncomfortable. And I'll get more on that later, but those places are not churches, shouldn't be considered churches. And they really bother me, and they're traps for desperate people that need help, and I'll expound on that later. So here's my response, and of course I'm going to stop and make comments and paraphrase because it wouldn't be me without lots of words. Sorry for the delayed response. I just realized you're posting anonymously. Please feel free to directly message me if you want to talk more. By the way, I haven't gotten any message requests. I grew up in a Reformed Baptist church. When I was a teen, I was dragged into a contemporary wannabe megachurch. It was not reverent. I felt pressured to do things I wasn't comfortable doing. They relied heavily on emotional manipulation, which people mistakenly identify as spirituality. This is a little bit of a challenge, holding a camera, looking away from it, reading this paper, and walking all at the same time. I just hope I don't walk into a bear or something. Just stand here in the shade for a second. It wasn't reverent, felt pressure to do things I'm not comfortable, relied heavily on emotional manipulation, which people mistakenly identify as spirituality. I dealt for years with people who exhibited a fake spirituality in church, making air quotes here, and in the paper I put quotes around the word church, and outside church exhibited self-absorption and materialism. I can't talk today for some reason. It was pretty soul-crushing. I was ready to become an atheist after several years of that. And by the way, every bit of that's true. My experience there, from the very beginning, it was really uncomfortable, to put it lightly. I didn't think it was anything real or of any substance there. And I wasn't like some kind of like spiritual guru or something, but I could tell that this was not authentic. This made me crave beauty, reverence, and tradition, something deeper and more ancient than a traditional Baptist church could offer. All right, I'm going to pump the brakes real fast and talk about my experience at the Reformed Baptist Church. If you're not familiar with the Reformed Baptist Church, it's kind of like a Baptist church, but with better music standards. And they're Calvinist, although a lot of Southern Baptists are Calvinist too, but the Reformed Baptist Church is officially Calvinist, and anything with the name Reformed in its name is Calvinist. But getting on with the story, dwelling on this a little more, being Baptist, they don't baptize babies. They have a piano on one side of the room and an organ on the other, but they had better music standards. So most of the time they would sing nice hymns like Praise to the Lord the Almighty and A Mighty Fortress and stuff like that, and use the organ without a piano and organ duet, which I've always thought piano and organ duets were trashy, and I've always thought that really sentimental music is trashy. But the music that they did over at the Reformed Baptist Church was actually respectable stuff, with theology and stuff like that. So now I'm going to get on with the story. That was to me what traditional worship was, but even when I was a teenager and we went to that church, I knew that wasn't historical Christianity. I knew that, obligatory Catholicism is bad, because I was told, as long as I was old enough to know that there is such a thing called the Catholic Church, that they're evil and, they're just as bad as the communists, except in a different way. They're not going to heaven because they think they have to kill Jesus every week, and they worship Mary and all that weird stuff. But I knew that whatever they do in a traditional Baptist church isn't like historical Christianity. But I was okay with it until I experienced the contemporary church. That made me really crave something a lot more historical. All right, so getting back to the story. I listened to a lot of Anglican chant, Gregorian chant, Byzantine chant, and organ music. I can't get enough organ music. At the same time, I was constantly told that people who observe historical Christian practices have traditional reverent worship have, quote, dead traditions of men. If I got $1 every time I heard that, I'd be as rich as Bill Gates. I was told it's hard to tell if they're saved with all those rituals and man-made traditions. The spiritual and mental abuse I suffered back then mixed with emotional manipulation and people flaunting their materialism and insincerity made me so sick I was ready to become an atheist. I'm sorry that's coming off like I'm reading it because I literally just read it, but it's literally the truth. I mean, my experience at that church was just absolutely traumatizing from the first time I was there till the last time I was there. And, their contempt and derision for traditional worship and the way they use those kinds of, I don't know if that really counts as gaslighting or what, but if I asked about a church that has existed for more than 49 minutes, that has practices that originated before the 1970s, and I think that's when a lot of contemporary Protestant worship kind of originated, was in the 70s or the 60s, which is still very new in terms of Christian history. But anyway, getting back to the story, they would use that line to kind of, I don't know if gaslight is the right word, but something akin to gaslighting me into staying in that awful place, until I had as much as I could handle. At the same time, I was constantly flaunting their... Everyone else seemed to have it together. Everybody had it better than me. I was told that because of some sin in my life, that God was punishing me. So, anyway, this story that I'm telling right now goes back to the 2000s. And not like I've got it together now and my life is wonderful, and I'm like rolling up in a Bentley and have a big giant mansion and stuff, or that I'm doing well in any definable metric. But I was going through a pretty rough patch in the 2000s, and I'm not going to get too much into that. But, when I went to people and I needed counseling or any kind of anything, they had nothing but smug, condescending, judgmental things like, well, God's just punishing you and you just need to, learn whatever God's trying to teach you so that you can stop suffering, and that kind of stuff. Which, that doesn't mean that bad things happening in your life are not divine punishment, but, because it can be, and sometimes it can just be the consequences of your own bad choices. But sometimes it's just that bad things happen, especially nowadays, so if somebody comes to me and says, all these bad things are happening in my life, first thing I'm going to think isn't, well, you must be, you must be a bad sinner and God's punishing you and you need to repent and we're not going to help you in any way because that'd be enabling you to keep sinning. All right, so let's keep on going. Before this time, I had never been very serious about my faith, and that's true. I, at one point, said the sinner's prayer when I was a kid back in the 80s, and I was scared that I'd go to hell. And after that, I believed I was saved. And, but besides that, my faith wasn't very deep. Of course, your faith can't be that deep when that's as much as you believe or know. Well, so that Jesus came into your heart and became your personal Lord and Savior. I'm sorry if I'm offending anybody because I might sound derisive and contemptful about that kind of belief because I lived through it and it really did a lot of damage. I think I just paraphrased the next few sentences on this thing I wrote. Sinner's prayer, believed I was saved. But it never really, I guess it had some effect on my life, but it wasn't like I wasn't on fire for Jesus and going on mission trips or anything like that. You couldn't really go to a monastery in the non-denominational church or in a Baptist church because they don't have that kind of stuff. So if I wanted to be devoted to God, there really wasn't much I could do, which I think actually takes away people's ability to be devoted to God, like by taking away things that they can use to devote their life to God, like monasticism. You just take away people's ability to devote themselves to God. But that's a whole nother rant for a whole nother video. Let me see here. So, I was never serious about my faith. I was very agitated. In my experience at this place, and I did name drop them in the paper, and it's North Hills Community Church. Really awful place. Don't ever go there. Except maybe to say boo when you drive by. The music was horrible. They just repeated the same few words over and over. I wrote that down in here, and it's basically the truth. People treated me like crap. That's also true. My experience, like I already said, just derisive, contemptful dismissing of any concerns that I ever had, whether it was about personal issues I had or about, spirituality or, questions I had about other Christian groups. It was always like some form of mental abuse or spiritual abuse. I don't think it's unfair to say that about what they did. So one day, 19 years ago, I was driving and really on the edge of despair. And I was going somewhere, and I drove right past St. George, the Greek Orthodox Church in Greenville, with this really big, beautiful building. And I always wanted to go inside and see what that place was like, because I had no idea what Greek Orthodox is. I just knew there was a really cool looking building. And this is a big part of why I really think that beauty is essential, and like ugliness and plainness isn't just offensive. Like, it's both spiritually offensive, but also materially offensive. And when people are like, oh yeah, we need simplicity. No, that crap makes me angry. And I could rant for half an hour about why plainness and ugliness makes me angry. I think it's evil. I think it's from the devil. Beauty is from heaven, and ugliness is from hell. Anyway, this beautiful church, I kept seeing it, and so in a way it was like silently preaching the gospel to me with its beautiful architecture. That, by the way, the design of the building, is designed to reflect Christian theology. And wasn't just a box, with movie screens that come down out of the ceiling. And so one day, 19 years ago, I was driving by and I just suddenly stopped, got off the road, went over to the church. There were cars in the parking lot. It was a weekday, and I wasn't really expecting them to be having services. But I saw cars in the parking lot, so I just rolled up and wanted to go inside. And I thought, maybe there was a wedding or a funeral or something going on, and hopefully I could just go in and talk to somebody. By the way, check these woods out. Is that not beautiful? Here, check that out. I'm really enjoying this. It's a real beautiful place to walk. I just wish it was about 20 degrees colder, that's all. So I walked around outside the church. I probably took a few pictures with my camera. Now I'm just totally off script, just kind of like freestyling, ad-libbing. The church was locked. There wasn't a service going on. Cars were in the parking lot because they rent out their parking lot. And people who work downtown and commute into the city park their cars there. So let me see here. So I took down their website address and I went home and got on the internet. This was before smartphones and stuff. And I started doing a bunch of research. And the research that I did made me conclude that Orthodox Christianity is the true Christian faith. And that wasn't just a response. I mean, that wasn't just a conclusion that I met very casually, after reading a good argument, because I had been told my whole life, Catholics aren't saved because they worship Mary and they are idolatrous and they think they have to kill Jesus every week. And all kinds of other things, a lot of which are just blasphemous lies. And I didn't know much about Orthodox, but I think I had been told things like, they're basically Catholics without a pope, which is an extreme oversimplification. By the way, look how beautiful this is. Is that not beautiful? And these tall pines here. By the way, this place is called Tall Pines. Isn't that funny? So yeah, I was told that Catholics are bad and Orthodox are basically Catholics without the Pope, which is an extreme oversimplification. That leaves out a lot of things that I'm not going to talk about in this video because it's already getting too long. I had 13 gigabytes of free space on my phone. Now I have 8.2 gigabytes of free space on my phone. And I'm going to fill it all up and I'm going to try to talk about all the things I wanted to talk about. But I had my old King James Bible from when I was a kid. And I used that as kind of a reference for scriptures that they cited on websites that I looked at to do my research. And I wouldn't just read one verse, because anybody can make one verse say whatever they want. You've got in Protestantism, in American evangelicalism, you've got Arminianism, or is it Arminianism? One's a race of people. The other one is a theological belief. And then you've got Calvinism, which is Calvinism. And, and I remember the debates about Arminianism versus Calvinism and how, one of them says that we have free will and the other one says that humans don't have free will and can't cooperate with God and are just bound to Satan and basically have to be divinely coerced into being saved. But while I am ranting, look at this. Okay, this pine tree here was blown over during the hurricane. And the very tip of it here is starting to point up. So unless this tree is cut down or something, these tips are just going to start growing up. And this part of the tree here, the trunk is just going to get super beefy. And these branches are going to start growing straight up because life finds a way. I wonder if I stood that tree back up, if it would survive and just start growing like normal again. What was I saying? Arminianism, Calvinism, and other evangelical groups. A lot of them base their theology on one Bible verse taken out of context. And I had already seen and experienced that. And like I said earlier, I wasn't some kind of spiritual guru, and I don't think I'm much of one now. But, I had seen that happen a few times, and I wasn't going to let somebody else pull one over on me. So, I would read whole chapters to make sure that what they were saying this verse says actually lines up with what I was reading. And it did every time. And one of the things that was the real kicker for me, the thing that pushed over the first domino that made all the other dominoes fall was the Eucharist, which Baptists vehemently deny is the body and blood of Christ. It's just a symbol. If I got $1 every time I heard that. And they also deny sacraments. That physical things don't have divine grace. They are ordinances, which is just actions that you do out of obedience. And there's two ordinances, communion or the Lord's Supper and baptism. And you do them out of obedience and they don't actually impart any kind of divine grace on you, which, by the way, that directly contradicts Scripture. And there's lots of places in the New Testament that directly contradict those things. Also, the idea that physical things can't impart divine grace on you is basically Gnosticism. So, and even American evangelicals know that Gnosticism is bad. I've never been down this trail here before, but it looks decently maintained and wide, so I'm just going to walk down this trail. It's closed to vehicles, but foot travel is welcome. So we're just going to cruise on down here. Like I said, I haven't been down this trail before. You know, I should have fired up my hiking app so I could record this and get credit for it, but oh well. Now we are at 6.8 gigs, and the gigs are going by quickly. So anyway, after some research, I decided that I believe that the Orthodox faith is the true Christian faith. I mean, like literally a few weeks of staying up really late every night, and while also doing schoolwork, because I was in college at the time. I decided that I needed to just join this church, and not that, I can do it and I won't burst into flames as soon as I do, but that I need to do it, for my spiritual well-being. And the rest is history. No, there's more to it than that. I went to talk to the priest, told him what I was thinking, and he said, well, I can't just baptize you right away. You have to attend services and participate in the church, for like a year before I can do that. And I'm paraphrasing the heck out of what he said. And, as you can see, this trail may have at one point been navigable, but right now it's not. That is some Hurricane Katrina goodness right there. So we're turning around and going down a different trail. So that's what I did. I started going to services there. That was at St. George. That was the first Orthodox church I ever went to. And so I'm going to talk very briefly about that first experience there. The liturgy was really beautiful. And before divine liturgy, they have a service called Orthros, which basically is matins. And they did Byzantine chant. And Byzantine chant is really cool sounding. And if you don't know, like music theory and stuff like that, that's fine. It sounded really cool. And also the words are very deep and theological. It's not like saying "Our God reigns" over and over and over until, I don't know, your mouth stops working. It was just really beautiful, deep theology. You could learn a lot of what the Orthodox Church teaches, maybe all of it, by listening to the hymns. And then the divine liturgy started, and then the choir took over. And I wasn't really expecting this part. They had the chanters. During matins, but then there was a different choir for divine liturgy, and it was a mixed choir singing harmonized musical arrangements for the liturgy with organ accompaniment. And I knew very little about Orthodoxy before then, but I knew enough to know that I wasn't expecting to hear an organ. So that kind of took me off guard. It was not something I was expecting, but the music was still beautiful. I talked to the choir director after the divine liturgy, and I told her that I thought the music was really beautiful, and it was the most heavenly, angelic thing I'd heard in a long time. And she thought I was just being nice, and she apologized the choir hadn't been practicing as good as they should or something like that. I don't remember exactly, but she's like, no, you're just being nice. We weren't doing that great. Like, no, that's the most beautiful thing I've heard in a long time. And it was, because the music at North Hills is so terrible. Oh man, it was so bad. But also listening to like that deep theology of Orthodox Christianity, as opposed to, singing about how Sky Daddy makes me happy, which I know that sounds flippant and irreverent, but I mean, that's how I feel about the shallow music at places like North Hills, and they almost made me an atheist. Just after having that irreverent and shallow drivel crammed down my throat for all these years, well, for about 5 years, I was just so sick of it. I wanted either authentic Christianity or nothing at all. And I have completely departed from the script. We are totally ad-libbing, freestyling right now. So I'm gonna try to conclude this story, the story of how I became Orthodox. This might become a multi-part series. So anyway, I went to that Divine Liturgy and I loved it. I wasn't expecting to hear an organ, but other than that, I thought the choir was great. And I love how deep and theological the music is. I was really drawn to the music. And I had never considered myself to be a musician, or to have any real interest in music, or doing music, until I started going to an Orthodox church. And then I was like, yeah, I want to start singing this stuff. Because the music had power and meaning. It wasn't just like, our God reigns, our God reigns. I know it sounds like I'm being like, I don't know what the word is, I don't mean to be flippant or disrespectful, but I also think that like that kind of music deserves to be mocked because of how bad it is. And it can't possibly not be spiritually harmful. I mean, you're just basically, what is the word? Dazzling yourself or hypnotizing yourself by repeating a mantra over and over, and people try to emotionally manipulate themselves or other people into crying and then thinking that that's the Holy Spirit moving them. I mean, no, it's not. I could just make a whole separate video, and I may do that, called The Horrors of North Hills, about all the trauma that I experienced there. I'm going to try to move on from that, though. That Orthodox liturgy at St. George was totally different. And even with a really awful electronic organ, the music was still amazing, because of that deep, rich theology. By the way, look at these flowers here. This is, I think, a laurel. And this time of year, they have these beautiful flowers. And now that we're kind of into the second half of May, those flowers aren't going to be with us for much longer. But they sure are pretty. Look, there's a whole bunch of them. So anyway, that's I guess you could call that a life event, that first Divine Liturgy I went to. I mean, after that, I was like, there is no turning back now. And, I started regularly attending Orthodox church services after that. I went to another Orthodox church called St. John of the Ladder, and they're even further away. But they also have more services. So I would go to Vespers there, like on Wednesday night and Saturday night. That really adds up fast when you're burning a lot of gas driving out there and stuff. But it was cool going there and going to all those services. And I just couldn't get enough I don't know, that might be the conclusion of this video. I mean, I started out reading this absolute encyclopedia here where I was basically encouraging a person who was asking for encouragement. And a lot of people were just dropping names of different Baptist churches or non-denominational churches. And like, if you're somebody who hasn't been going to church and you go to some place where they're like low-key snake handling, which they don't do that in North Hills, but I mean, coming from that traditional Baptist experience at the Reformed Baptist Church that I'm not naming right now, although I guess it doesn't hurt anything if I do. It's Grace Baptist Church, if you're wondering. Going from that to North Hills was quite a bit of a shock. And even though they weren't snake handling, they might as well have been. With all the crazy stuff they were doing, you know, people flopping around on stage and calling it praise dance. And praise dance is just a non-liturgical version of liturgical dance. And if you don't know what either one of those two things are, just do a search on the internet and you'll see the absolute eldritch horrors that they are. And thank me later. And just get on your knees and thank God that that's not something that's a regular part of your life, if it isn't. I don't know, that might be a kind of a summary of what led me to the Orthodox Church. So I'm going to try to wrap this up. I've got 4 gigabytes of free space left on this phone. We're going to use every bit of it. Well, we're not actually, but we might as well be. All right, so what's in the bush there? That's the second time I heard something skittering there. As long as it's a little thing and not a big thing. I want to be the biggest thing in the woods. Anyway, man, I totally got off track there. What was I saying? I attended Orthodox church services for about a year. And I bounced between St. George and St. John of the Ladder a lot. And finally, I was baptized in 2007. And that was a really awesome thing. That might have to be a separate video because now we're down to about 3.5 gigs. And it was a really awesome experience. And so, if you're not Orthodox and you're thinking about becoming Orthodox and you're hearing about being baptized, and maybe you've been to another church and been baptized in that church, let me tell you the story of how I didn't get baptized before I became Orthodox. And by the way, 10/10, I would totally recommend not getting baptized before you become Orthodox. You should totally get baptized in the Orthodox Church. It is the coolest thing. So, you know, I grew up, I was in my 20s when this happened, when I got baptized. And, you know, but I grew up in this Reformed Baptist church. And because they believe that baptism is a ordinance and not a sacrament, and that no sin forgiving or divine grace of any kind is imparted on you, that it doesn't have salvific power, then I didn't really think I had to do it, even though it's called an ordinance and you're supposed to do it out of like submission. I don't know why. I was just always afraid to get out there and do it. And honestly, I don't know why. You know, I knew I should do it, but I was always just nervous about doing it, so I never did. And, you know, the whole idea of it not being sacramental kind of took away the importance of the weight of it. And so I just felt like it wasn't that really vital or crucial. It was just something that I could do, you know. Because of the circular logic that follows just like this. And we have about 3.2 gigabytes remaining. By the way, Open Camera is a great software for your phone if you want to record. I'm saved. I said the sinner's prayer. And if I have to get baptized, then it's works. And, American evangelicalism is really against a works-based salvation because you can't earn your way to heaven. There's no way that you can earn grace. Grace is given freely without any action on your part. And there's nothing that you can do to earn salvation. So therefore, even though baptism is an ordinance and I should do it, I don't have to do it. Or not that I don't have to and I plan on never doing it, but that it's not really that important, because if it is, then this whole argument about works isn't really true. And orthodoxy just kind of blows all that stuff out of the water. Because it's not like you have to earn your salvation or that you can. It's that if you have that faith will be accompanied by the actions that you have to do, whether it's overcoming some sin you're struggling with, which, by the way, that's never going to stop happening. You're always going to be struggling with yourself, but you should struggle. Otherwise, your faith is dead. Just like in the Bible, it says faith without works is dead. And it really is. But baptism isn't just an ordinance, just an act of obedience. That doesn't impart any tangible grace. It's actually a sacrament, something that does give us divine grace. And then after that, there is chrismation, where you get the seal of the gift of the Holy Spirit, which is a very awesome smelling oil is put on you that is blessed and holy, absolutely flying in the face of American evangelicalism. But it was one of the realest experiences I ever had in my life was getting baptized. So if you aren't baptized, don't get baptized till you become Orthodox. It is the realest experience you'll ever have. Boy, there's a lot of trees down. I guess they haven't cleared this trail yet. What do you think? Now we're down to 2.4 GBs. Orthodox Christianity, baptism, chrismation. That was an experience. When I was talking to the priest at St. George, he was like, "You've never been baptized?" Like, nope. Because he was expecting to just chrismate me, and that is a practice that's pretty common in Orthodoxy today, where if you have been baptized in another church, a church that we consider to be heretical, we'll just out of grace and economia is the word they use, accept that baptism and give you chrismation, which I'm not against that. I don't think it's invalid, but if I had been baptized by a group that I don't think is Christian and doesn't have valid rights, I would still want to get an Orthodox baptism. So yeah, maybe I sound like a hardcore fundamentalist Orthodox now, but I promise I'm not. There's people way harder core than me. But at the same time, that's how I feel about baptism. But if you were Baptist and you got baptized in a Baptist church and you get chrismated in the Orthodox church, that still works. It's not like some angel is going to come and stop you from taking communion. Anyway, so that is why I was in my 20s and had never been baptized, even though I had been attending church my whole life, and my sister had been baptized. Both of my sisters were baptized before I was, and I still think that the Orthodox baptism is the coolest, though. I mean, it was really cool. And I really don't know how to describe it other than it was just really awesome and one of the realest experiences I ever had. I'm really enjoying walking in these woods, by the way. Like I could feel like a divine energy coming down over me when I was baptized, and it was really awesome. And it was just, I can't describe how awesome it was. And it was just really amazing. So I might just go ahead and wrap it up. That brings you to the story of how I was baptized in the Orthodox Church. And maybe I will kind of tell more stories later about kind of my faith journey since then. What I am hoping to do or trying to do with my life. And I also feel like I'm trying to turn things around and kind of start over with my life, and that's kind of part of that journey, because the journey never really ends, at least not while you're on this side of the ground. Life isn't static. It isn't like you get saved and boom, that's it. Salvation is a process that goes on throughout your whole life, and you do that by communing with God, praying, repenting, fasting, at least doing as good as you can, and trying to do better, And I'm not like some kind of like glowing angelic, perfect person over here. I'm trying and failing a lot. I just have to keep trying, though. So I guess that's going to be the conclusion of this video, and I'm not going to edit it. One take, 13 gigabytes, almost 13 gigabytes, of my story of how I became Orthodox and how negatively I feel about contemporary worship. We'll talk about organs, church music, and all kinds of fun things like that next time, so make sure to tune in. Thank you.